Hey everybody, welcome back to the comic book store. We've not been here in quite some time, but I felt like it's been a while and I wanted to talk about comics. So this is Dylan, as you remember, manager of the store.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort
Sort,
of.
sort of
Yep.
manager, sort of just hold back the tide as comics come in every single week without fail and get them on the shelf so people can read them.
Speaking of comics, so what's new? What's coming up? That's
Today, Fantastic Four #1.
Okay.
Like that's the big comic, right? Because it's one of those properties that I don't think has ever sold well as a comic. It's never been the #1 comic in the world, and certainly not in the last 20 years. Right at the
Yeah.
time they made the two movies about it, it's never been a great selling
Well-
comic. It's a tough sell, right? It's a married couple,
Yeah.
his best friend and her little brother, and it's a tough comic to write well. When it is written well, it's sort of a massive star-spanning galactic odyssey, but that doesn't always appeal to a wide number of readers, right? And
Yeah.
it's had some great runs, right? John Byrne, who was famous for being an X-Men artist, had a wonderful run as the writer and artist on Fantastic Four back in the, I want to say, 80s, and in the like early to mid 80s.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful defining run. There've been a few other really good runs, but there's not like three or four defining Fantastic Four stories. Probably what they're best known for is being that sort of the comic that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created. The comic that kind of it and Spider-Man and Hulk helped launch that sort of that rebirth of Marvel comics. It's what became the Marvel way, right?
Yeah.
Is flawed heroes. The Thing hates being a rocky monster, right? Mr. Fantastic is the reason it all happened and feels guilt about it. There's
Yeah.
relationship troubles, but it's just never sold that well, right?
Yeah.
It's probably a better pop culture property than it is a comic book property.
Well, see, it's funny because I remember when like the most recent Fantastic Four movie came out, and you'd have your hardcore Fantastic Four fans accusing Disney of pulling back, like to tank the Fantastic Four comics so that the movie itself wouldn't do well, and I just.
That's
no, I-
probably fair. That's probably fair. Fantastic Four comics disappeared, right? They disappeared.
Yeah.
There has not been a Fantastic Four comic for a few years now.
Yeah.
Right? Like you haven't published one of Stan Lee's defining comic books hasn't had a published issue in years.
Yeah.
That's a little ridiculous, right? Now, it doesn't it's also like, is it a coincidence then that sort of Marvel tried to push the Inhumans instead of the X-Men in its comics? Is it coincidence then that we haven't had the Wolverine property of Wolverine for a few years either, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these conspiracy theories that abound, there's like Marvel has put some meat on that bone, because they have, there has not been a Wolverine for a few years, and as good as the death of Wolverine was, come on, it's Wolverine. He should have been in a comic book.
Yeah.
The Fantastic Four, like I say, it's never been a great seller, but come on, it's always been a money-making comic book. So give me
Yeah.
a break that you can't produce a Fantastic Four comic. So there's truth. I think there's some truth to those conspiracy rumors, but now it's all back, right? Like now it's all back.
But then you take into consideration that, I know that in the States, Fox and Disney have got their approval to merge. It's not internationally approved yet, but there. So we talked about this in like our very first video. So the idea being that do you suppose then maybe that this is kind of like the seeds of them starting to amp up what they want to do in the future?
I think they do. I think if you when you look at building a Marvel universe, you got to have the first family of the Marvel universe,
Yeah.
right? So to not have the Fantastic Four in a big galactic story seems so strange,
Yeah.
right? Especially when I mean, things that they've pushed in like the Shield television series, like the Inhumans.
Yeah.
That spins out of the Fantastic Four. Like, these are so much of what happens in the Marvel universe starts with the Fantastic Four, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Spider-Man has always been the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man in Marvel Comics, where he jumps in and out of the big storylines, but he
Yeah.
stays in Brooklyn.
'Cause
He
that's
stays
his-
in
that's
New
his
York.
little nook, yeah.
Yeah, he swings from flagpoles that,
Yeah, kind of
last
like Daredevil.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the Fantastic Four, it's the entire universe. It truly is the Marvel universe. And they're, as these sort of explorers of the Marvel universe, they're the first ones to hit all these. And
Yeah.
when you talk about Thanos, right? there are other cosmic level villains that dozens of high powered heroes can fight, and they're all Fantastic Four villains, right?
Yeah.
You've got your Galactus, Annihilus. I mean, Galactus is the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
Like, they blew it in the movie, right? In the second
Yeah.
movie, Galactus just a big purple cloud when he should have that big helmet and everything else.
Kind of like the Green Lantern.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, Galactus would look ridiculous on screen.
Yeah.
But I think one thing we've learned from like the Marvel movies lately is ridiculous is okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can have men and women in costumes running across an airport tarmac.
Well, that's-
and it works.
I think Guardians of the Galaxy was the first one to prove that ridiculous can work.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
one you had a property that like lesser people knew, like maybe diehard comic book fans knew about the Guardians, but then they went and they took this unknown property and made it work, which gave permission to Doctor Strange. And
Well, but I mean, look at like now in the comic books, and for the last 12 years or so, Iron Man has been a big player in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
He's not.
yeah,
He's not. He's been an Avenger. He's had a middling selling comic book. At the time the Iron Man movie came out, I would have called Iron Man a B character.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Definitely would have called the Guardians of the Galaxy probably a C or D character.
Yeah.
Right? Even with a couple of popular runs of the comic book lately, I would have called them a C or D character. Whereas you would always put the Fantastic Four as an A A characters, right? They are sort of, everybody guest stars with them. They guest star with everyone. I mean, when you talk about Fantastic Four comics not selling well, you've also got to remember The Thing had Marvel 2-in-1 for years,
Yeah.
which was basically The Thing running his own comic. The Thing has had his own comic. The Human Torch featured a lot in Ultimate Spider-Man,
Yeah.
right, and was a popular recurring character there. So it shows that these characters can be written. It's just, can you make a movie with them together that's not schlocky like those first two? And I like those first two movies. I'm not a hater.
There are a lot of I think back them with like nostalgic fun.
Yeah.
You know, like they were fun. They were campy and kind of
Yeah.
owned up to it.
They made Michael Chiklis wear a suit, which probably was a budget thing, right? Instead of
Yeah.
CGIing the Thing. But Michael Chiklis's personality and voice sounded great for the Thing.
Oh, it was
right.
perfect.
So they hit the characters, and this is the thing. If that Fantastic Four movie was bad, the Fantastic Four themselves are actually really well-run characters. To say that Mr. Fantastic was boring in those movies, Mr. Fantastic is boring.
Yeah.
He's a boring character. You've got to make him sort of the catalyst between the other three.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I think the real friction in Fantastic Four comes with Human Torch and the Thing.
Yeah.
So I think some of the best stories in the Fantastic Four's history have involved those two other characters, and not so much tried to write stories about Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Who's just an old guy who's married and has kids, and I'm an old guy who's married and have kids. My life is not that exciting.
Yeah, well, it makes by having a cast or a team like that, it makes it relatable to more people. So they were going for a shotgun audience.
Yeah, I think you have to focus. You have to have a good storyline. I think your Doctor Doom has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just like Spider-Man, like Batman, so much of these heroes are defined by their villains. Fantastic Four have great villains, but you can't make Doctor Doom a business owner who turns into Magneto, right? Which is
Yeah.
what happened in the movies. Look, Doctor Doom should be a megalomaniacal Latvian dictator. It's okay to do that, right? Latveria is a made-up country. You can do this. It's, you know, you're if you're going to do Galactus, do a guy in a big purple suit. If you're going to do Annihilus, have the guy with the bug wings and the super powerful rod tied around his neck inexplicably. Do the villains the way they are in the comic, because they are big. They are sort of big character bite villains, so do it that way, right? Like take a chunk out of these franchises, borrow from the comics what people like, and put that in your movie. It's what I think the Russos, more so than the Joss Whedon movies, the Russo movies, which are your 3 Captain America movies and your latest Avengers, they sort of understand what people like about these characters, and they just keep picking at that guitar string, right? They're playing one note on a character, but it's the note everybody likes about the character, so it works.
Oh, crap. I was thinking something. Do you think that sometimes maybe like when they try and translate these properties to film, that the problem comes when you're dealing with more well-known characters, like your Batman, do you think that part of the success to like an Iron Man is that he was a B character.
Well, you can play with him, right? And they
Yeah.
did. They did play with Tony Stark, the Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark, who's slowly become the Tony Stark in the comic books, but at the time was not. Like the wisecracking sort of Tony Stark. His story arc was similar, but it was not the same character. Like Robert Downey Jr. brought a lot to that role that I think took the character from here to here.
Yeah.
And that's I'm not crediting the director or the writers or anyone. I think Robert Downey Jr. came in and said, "Look, I don't need this job."
Yeah.
It rejuvenated his career, but I don't think Robert Downey Jr. was a guy that cared.
No.
I think what he said was, "This is the way I want to play the character," and he plays Robert Downey Jr. as that character.
Yeah.
It works fine, right? Like it's probably a better interpretation of the character because Robert Downey Jr. brings a lot of sort of his own take on it. It's probably a deeper character because comic book writers aren't. They're not winning. A lot of them aren't winning Pulitzer Prizes. Like superhero writers sometimes just write the comic character as it's always been instead of bringing that like extra level of real humanity to it. And when I say real humanity, you can still wear a big iron suit, but react and think and behave the way a real person would inside that suit, right?
Well, I think you're speaking about a completely different medium. It's so much harder to like writing an article. You can get into the meat of it, whereas so much of comic book telling is very visual. It's very pictorial. And so most of your emotion, most of your depth is coming. Well, a good chunk of it is coming from the image itself.
Well, and this is the where I another thing I think the Russo movies get right is look at the combat sequences in those Captain America movies, the fight sequences, the best wrestling matches. If you're a pro wrestling fan, the best wrestling matches, the physical violence tells the story of the match, right?
Yeah.
So it's not two wrestlers talking to each other in the ring. It's the build up, and then when the fight happens, the fight resolves the character conflict.
Yeah.
I really think, and not every time in these Captain America movies, but I think more than the other movies, the Captain America movies, the fight didn't just resolve the conflict between the two characters. It told part of the story as it resolves the conflict, and that's a key difference. That's sort of the difference between really good filmmaking and an entertaining comic book movie, right? Is if you can make your violence make sense. Yeah. And Winter Soldier, I think, did it better than anything. The sort of the dance between Bucky and Cap helped resolve the storyline between them.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's just too big. It's just two CGI things smashing into each other, which is. If you're going to criticize that Guardians of the Galaxy, the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, it just turned into a big CGI schmoz at the end. It's my issue with a lot of these movies. They just turn into big CGI fights at the end instead of why. Like why this action, why that action. The first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, which didn't resolve in a big fight, which resolved with the dance off and things like that. That told the story. Like the everything you do visually in a comic book should help you tell your story. And I'm an old fart, and so I complain about comic books in that they use too many big poster-looking splash pages and things like that. It's too much the character posing so that the artist can show off what they can do, instead of what I prefer every panel, everything, every visual thing you do in a comic book and every visual thing you do in a movie should have a purpose for the storytelling, right? Yeah. And that is when you make the best comics. That's when you make the best movies, is when you work those two elements together. And I think that last Avengers movie did a really good job. All of Thanos' violence sort of proves a point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it starts right when he takes on the Hulk in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? No stones, no nothing. The Russos, I think, looked and realized we have not established what Thanos is. Yeah. Nobody really knows. A guy hunting, big purple guy in a helmet.
Problem, right? With any of them, he's this looming big bad, but we've not seen
but then he pummels the Hulk. The Hulk is just swinging. Thanos is using the Hulk's momentum against him. He's a fighter, and he's really strong. So he pummels the Hulk, right? And that also kicks off an interesting Hulk storyline in the movie. But more importantly, it gives you the idea of what Thanos really is.
Well, I think when you deal with that movie, you have to watch the Thor Ragnarok and that movie back to back. The way it's set up, because if you want to talk about the Hulk,
one ends where the other one begins.
Because
right?
with the Hulk, what that finally does is between those two movies, it sets up the idea that the Hulk isn't just Bruce Banner. The Hulk is the Hulk, and now the Hulk's just decided I'm not going to just come swinging. Because
they're never going to make another Hulk movie.
No,
that ship has sailed. So you tell your Hulk story in these movies, right?
So I liked that what they did was they said, okay, he's not just going to come out and save the day every time Bruce wants him. Like he wants his, like, you know, like they set up this interesting dynamic where you have two entities using one body, and how do you resolve that? And so I think that's where the next Avengers you'll see the
well, I
play out in a
I think
fun
what
way.
it all sets up is it all sets up just when he finally does turn to the Hulk, he turns, you know, that saves the day. They gave you like they gave you all these red herrings in the last movie where it's like, oh wow, as these things are ripping the armor apart, the Hulk's going to jump out and save the day. The Hulk never jumped out and saved the day, right? It ended up Thor did it, but not really. So there were a lot of red herrings in that movie as far as is this like false endings, right?
Yeah.
Is this it? Is Does Thor? Everybody talks about Thor's arrival was so great. Well, he still lost.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I mean, that brings me back to Fantastic Four #1. It's tell those big sweeping stories.
Yeah.
You got four heroes in the Fantastic Four, sometimes 6 or 7 if you include She-Hulk and people like that.
Yeah.
But give them those moments, right? Thor got several great moments in that last Avengers movie. When you're writing your comic book for Fantastic Four, give Sue Storm, give Reid Richards, give Johny Storm, and give Ben Grimm. Give them moments, big character beat moments, because the Fantastic Four stories shouldn't be small and subtle. They should be big and wide-reaching. It's like Avengers movies should be widescreen.
Well,
Ant-Man can be a tiny little
It's
movie.
because you're dealing with, in one property, you're already dealing with an Avengers type mentality. Like, just off the go, they're a team. You're not dealing with just Reid Richards. You're not dealing with
a super scientist, super strong guy. You know, the invisible girl who might be invisible woman who might be the most powerful of them, right? Johny Storm, who like literally lights on fire and is a rock star when he's not on fire.
Yeah,
right. So I hope they do stuff like that. I have faith. The artist on the new Fantastic Four is Sarah Pichelli, and she's just wonderful. She's one of the co-creators of the Miles Morales Spiderman character, who's also got an animated movie, a computer animated movie coming out, which looks fantastic. The writer of Fantastic Four is the guy that just finished a 10-year run on Spider-Man, and while his Spider-Man was sometimes hit and miss for me, Fantastic Four being a very action-packed, fast-paced comic, I think he'll be really good on that. So I mean, mainstream comics, man, like that's. I have a lot of hope for Fantastic Four.
So there you have it. They're setting this up for a home run. So you should go and check this out, because it's either going to be fantastic, or it's not.
We'll have copies on the shelf.
Fair enough. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.